The conversation that we're about to have right now is a conversation that we must have. It's important as we do talk about the emergence of global Africa. What also comes to mind when we do talk about emergence, ladies and gentlemen, is this call that we have heard right now for the past 2 days for a greater unification, of course, of the African continent from all over the world. Everywhere that they are calling home right now, the unification to leverage our resources a lot better to finance our sustainable economic transformation. So allow me to introduce to the panel who will be having this conversation with me, and I am hoping that you still have energy to give them as warm of an applause, even better than you did give me. Jokes aside, ladies and gentlemen, beginning with the Honorable Ludovic Ngatse. He is the Minister of Budget, Public Account and Portfolio for the Congo Republic. We have Honorable Michael Brian Halkitis. He's the Minister of Economic Affairs for the Bahamas, also joining us. Honorable Abena Osei Asare, the Minister of State for the Ministry of Finance in Ghana. Mrs. Arunma Ote, Executive in Residence and Member, Global Leadership Council, SAID Business School, University of Oxford. And last but not least, Ms. Florizal Lizer, President and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa. It's quite a lot to say, and the energy in the room is quite electric, which is a fantastic thing. I would like to begin with the ministers and the various representatives from the public office from the African continent. Just as we are talking about the strengthening of this emergence of global Africa, and as you are seeing a funding pool that's different from the funding pool that you have right now, just given where our economies do find themselves right now and the budget constraints that a lot of economies across the continent are experiencing, how are you seeing the potential of global Africa and the strengthening of it in helping you finance some of your economic transformation needs? And Minister Ngatse, I'd like to begin with you, sir. Just your assessment of global Africa and the impact potentially it can play and have on transforming the continent. So what do you see?
Merci d'abord les autorités du Bahamas. C'est la première fois que je mets le pied en Amérique latine. J'ai découvert en arrivant que ce pays était majoritairement noir. C'est vraiment une découverte pour moi. Je pense que je suis ici aussi en Afrique parce que j'ai vu que c'était des terres plutôt africaines. Je remercie la banque pour cette initiative. Et ce n'est pas la première, je sais qu'ils apportent énormément dans le financement des économies africaines. Pour répondre à votre question, je suis donc ministre du Budget du Congo. Je comprends mieux l'importance de cette initiative de la banque qui vient en réalité donner une touche réellement africaine du financement de la transformation des économies africaines. En réalité, nous avons des banques multilatérales que sont la Banque mondiale, le Fonds monétaire, la Banque africaine de développement, qui ont un prisme à elles. Et la banque Afreximbank est une banque d'abord africaine qui travaille avec les Africains et dans une conception africaine. C'est comme ça que nous, Congo, en tant que pays fondateur de la banque, pensons le rôle de cette banque. Et je suis très fier donc des autorités de la banque, de leur leadership et de ce qu'ils sont en train de faire pour assister les économies africaines à combler les gaps de financement qu'il y a vis-à-vis des critères qui nous sont imposés par le système international. C'est vraiment ça la réalité de cette banque, qui est en réalité une banque qui joue un autre rôle autre que celui joué par les banques multilatérales. Et j'en cite pour preuve tous les grands financements qu'ils ont apportés, notamment à mon pays. On est engagé vis-à-vis de la banque à plus d'un demi-milliard de dollars, un demi-milliard de dollars, ce qui est important. Et donc, je ne peux qu'apprécier cette initiative et donc est disponible pour qu'on en parle et qu'on fasse des propositions afin qu'on en tire plus d'avantages et d'économies pour la transformation de nos pays. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. I can say, in as much as you came to the Caribbean for the first time and you didn't realize that there were as many black people as you did see, I came to the Caribbean and I surprised the taxi driver who drove me to the hotel, who said that when he thought of Africans, similar to what Ms. Viola Davis was saying yesterday, he thought that we still walk around in spears and we live with, lions in our backyard and thereof. I suppose it definitely does speak to the importance of us being more acquainted with one another in terms of platforms like this and beyond. Coming to you, Honorable Asare, ma'am, how are you seeing the opportunity of global Africa and how best to leverage it to drive sustainable transformation in Ghana?
What I'm saying is that I think we should use the tools that we have. As Africans, we have lots of tools. One, we have the policies in there that works for us. We have our trade policies, like the AFCFTA. What are we doing with it? How can we implement it to make sure we get the benefits that we have? As Africans, we have 60% of the arable land in the world. What are we doing with what we have to make sure we produce food for the whole world, and then we start exporting food from Africa? As Africans, we have the youthful population on our side. What are we doing to make sure we harness the youthful population to make sure they work for us, to bring us together and also to transform our economy? As Africans, we have the natural resources. How are we harnessing on these natural resources to bring in more revenue for us? Yesterday, I listened to Alhaji Aliko Dangote, and he said that, look here, nobody is going to come in and bring investment to your country. It is us. We will have to come together, agree on what we really want to do, and that is what will attract the investors to come to us. So we have many tools, and then we should use these tools to work for us positively, globally.
Ms. Arunma, the Minister touching on a few thoughts that are also quite close to your heart in terms of the importance of the youth and how to better leverage the youth, but also the importance of the resources, as she said, the tools that we already have and how to maximize what's already in our garden, as it were. Maybe perhaps just expatiate for the benefit of the audience.
But maybe you should permit me just to say a big thank you to the Afreximbank, because I do think that this concept of global Africa is probably what will finally unleash the potential of everybody of African origin, whether you live in Africa, you live in the Caribbean, or you live in any of the diaspora communities. And I say that because if you listen to the themes over the last 1.5 days, everyone has pointed to some of why Afreximbank is succeeding. And this morning I thought, what should I call it? I call it the 3 M's. The M of changing the mindset. And that changing of mindset means that we are in the driver's seat, everybody of African origin. We make the choices about the path forward. The second speaks to what the minister talked about, is basically more effectively managing our resources. Everyone, I think yesterday someone said we have 40% of the world's gold, we have 90% of the world's platinum, we have 1/3 of the critical mineral resources. And I say to myself, so why is DRC's GDP $64 billion and the market cap of Apple is $3.3 trillion? That needs to change. And that will change if we start doing at scale what Afreximbank's been leading on. But I actually do think that we have wealth, natural resources, but our most important wealth is actually our young people. 40% of the youth by 2030 come from Africa. And the youth is important because they're the resources of today, they're the resources of the future. They're open-minded, they're creative. Most that come from Africa are entrepreneurial, and they're excited about possibilities. They're able to innovate in ways that we haven't innovated before. And Africa has enormous amounts of young people. The Caribbean has enormous amounts of young people. But I think it was the former vice chair of the Federal Reserve who said, we need to invest in our young people. So education is critical. And we have some very, very good models coming out of the continent. So UM6P, which is Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco, focuses on experiential learning, focuses on making sure that we're creating entrepreneurs, that we're focusing on sectors that are important to the continent. Afreximbank University in Nigeria does exactly the same. So we need to make sure that we're investing in our youth so that they can help us with success today and help us with success tomorrow. For me, also important is a theme that I've heard across board, which is it's all about execution. I often say to people, people say culture eats strategy for breakfast. I say execution eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And what the Afreximbank has been able to combine, and thanks to Professor Rama, is leadership in terms of vision, leadership in terms of execution. Because we're past the time where we should be focused on ideas. It's basically how do you implement those ideas. The fact that we're here today having the first annual meetings of the Afreximbank and people making deals, we had the deals that were being announced just before we came on board, is action and not words. Yes?
That echoes the sentiments that were expressed by one of the speakers yesterday. I mean, just to paraphrase what he did say in terms of the biggest gap that Africa has right now is the gap between talking and acting. So when you talk about execution, essentially eating everything else for breakfast, lunch, and supper. But going back to Global Africa.
Sorry, I forgot to tell you about my third one is about money. And I love the
which
deals
makes the world go round.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, money is important. And Afreximbank has I think it was the Vice President for Legal Services who made the point about how they tapped into central bank reserves. We've got $2.2 trillion of money on the African continent, and most of it is investing in US treasuries when we've got some serious business opportunities that have high returns that we should be investing in. And Afreximbank has also set the example as to how we can invest in ourselves. Because if you're not investing in yourselves, how are you going to encourage others to come and invest in you?
So mindset management and money. And while I appreciate the strength of the conversations that we're having right now in terms of the importance of Africa fixing or shaping the continent in the manner that it wants to see, it is about partnership and collaboration, and it cannot be to the exclusion of the private sector. Florizel, which is where you come in, ma'am. You flew a whole host of Africans recently to Dallas, Texas. It was a very, very long way for us to go, but we went there. And what was encouraging to see was the amount of Africans that did turn up there, looking to explore and to better leverage opportunities in the US markets, and the amount of US investors who were there, who were also looking to better explore and leverage opportunities in the African continent. Your view of Global Africa, ma'am, and how it can further be accelerated for private sector participation.
This is a great panel to be on, talking about Global Africa and what that means both for Africans and for its partners. And at Corporate Council on Africa, we, for more than 30 years, have been driving the U.S.-Africa trade, investment, and business relationship, bringing together heads of state from Africa, as we did in Dallas, Texas a few weeks ago, 6 African heads of state, cabinet members from the Biden-Harris administration, heads of key agencies like the U.S. Export-Import Bank, and bringing in over 1,000 U.S. and African CEOs and senior corporate executives to talk about what we need to do next. And I think for global Africa, what's going to be most important is the commitment as well as the implementation by African leaders of business-friendly, investment-friendly reforms that will give confidence to investors, not just from outside of Africa, but even African investors, so that the capital that is needed, the money that is needed for all of these projects, the infrastructure projects in particular, I think will be very critical. So those business-friendly and investment-friendly reforms are very important. I think we also need to tap into some things that are possible both on the continent as well as in your partner countries like the US, and I want to use two examples. One is the African Continental Free Trade Area now offers the largest free trade market that's been established since the World Trade Organization. And you have 55 countries, 1.3 billion people, $3.4 trillion economy. We must use that, and American companies, I can tell you, our member companies are looking at it to say, how can we take advantage of this continental market? We can't invest country by country by country. We can't put manufacturing facilities of US products in every country. So we don't want to have to choose one here or one there. The opportunity of the AFCFTA is really critical, and we commend and support its implementation. The AU and the AFCFTA and all of its members are doing a great job there. On the US side, I wanted to talk about tapping into global Africa vis-a-vis the diaspora, and in particular the African American population. And the Association of African American Financial Advisors notes that African American wealth will be the equivalent of $103.5 trillion. Again, $103.5 trillion
with a T.
by 2050, just African Americans. So if we can tap into that, if we can leverage that and create the opportunities on the continent where they're looking, where can we invest our money? Where can we invest into our heritage? And you'll find a lot of African Americans, not just the high net worth individuals and people in sports and so forth. They have been looking for that avenue. But we're talking about average Americans who are saving and who are looking for places that they can invest into. And what would be better than having African Americans with that $103 trillion of worth investing in infrastructure in Africa?
Sure.
And so this is where we have to look at both what the continent is doing and offering, as well as what its partners like the US can offer, particularly the diaspora. We are a part of global Africa.
Minister Ngatse, when you, as a man who handles the budgets, right, and the budget is tight right now. It's not unique to the Congo. It's happening in most parts of the continent, most parts of the world, in fact. And you hear about untapped potential of resources of wealth, i.e., an example, the wealth of Americans and the growth rate there that we potentially see. And you hear about the wealth even or untapped resources that do sit in reserves of central banks. What does that say to you, sir, about opportunity and how to unlock it?
Merci beaucoup. Non, mais en fait, ce que vient de dire Madame nous impose des challenges, des défis pour l'avenir, en ce sens que pour être attractif, l'Afrique doit d'abord se transformer son mental, son économie, afin que les autres la voient autrement, autre que ce qu'elles sont en train de voir aujourd'hui. Ce qui veut dire que nous devons relever les défis de la collecte de l'épargne sur le plan économique pour la mettre dans les banques, financer notre propre développement. Nous devons mieux former nos enfants pour qu'ils soient dans le monde d'aujourd'hui et créer de la richesse. Nous devons aussi être ouverts, donc améliorer le doing business de nos pays pour être attractifs. Mais ce qui est encore plus... et un grand défi pour nous, c'est quoi? C'est que l'Afrique, c'est en réalité la prochaine terre de développement du monde. Et nous n'en avons pas suffisamment conscience aujourd'hui parce que les défis tels que ceux mentionnés et les opportunités que nous offre notre mobilisation à travers des initiatives telles que celle de Afreximbank sont encore embryonnaires, alors que les besoins sont énormes. Ça veut dire que quoi? Ça veut dire que nous devons continuer et surtout soutenir ceux qui ont la volonté de proposer ces défis. Quand je vois l'Afrique à travers sa diaspora dans le monde, je dis l'Afrique a beaucoup de défis. Je parlais tout à l'heure en backstage avec vous sur ce qui se passe en Amérique latine, notamment en Haïti. Haïti, c'est le premier pays noir à être indépendant. Aujourd'hui, nous avons tout un continent noir riche. Je suis ministre du budget, je ne dis pas que mon pays est riche, mais je dis qu'on peut faire quelque chose. Si, à travers des initiatives telles que celles que nous avons aujourd'hui avec Afreximbank, on peut dire, bon, on crée un petit fonds, Afrexim apporte $1 million, par exemple, et chaque pays africain, sur les 54, apporte un demi-million, au minimum pour les plus petits, et les plus grands, plus ce qu'ils peuvent apporter. Je pense qu'on aura fait quelque chose, non fût-ce que pour aider, par exemple, Haïti, à relever le défi de remettre les enfants à l'école. Parce que quand vous suivez la télé, Port-au-Prince est quasiment, je veux dire, ne fonctionne pas à 2/3. Il n'y a qu'une partie qui est libre. Donc, ce sont tous ces défis-là que nous pourrons relever demain si nous sommes mieux rassemblés et si nous voyons avec optimisme notre avenir. D'abord, en relevant les défis qui s'imposent à nous, à savoir transformer notre propre vie, c'est-à-dire améliorer les conditions de vie pour nos populations, d'abord en formant les gens, en mobilisant l'épargne qui est importante. Moi, je suis ministre du budget. Quand je vois tout l'argent qu'on a pu relever, qu'on a pu retirer de nos propres marchés sur les 4 dernières années, ça dépasse 5 à 6 fois plus que ce qu'on attendait des partenaires. Cet argent existe partout en Afrique, mais il est dans les poches des gens, il est dans les maisons à la maison, dans les coffres forts à la maison. Il faut le ramener en banque, il faut que les États travaillent pour utiliser cet argent pour financer leur développement. Ce que apporteront les autres sera un complément. Vous avez posé la question sur la diaspora. Cette diaspora, nous pourrions l'avoir beaucoup plus facilement si elles sont en nous la volonté de travailler dans la transparence et de créer de la richesse chez nous. Elle viendra toute d'elle-même. Aujourd'hui, c'est une grande opportunité pour l'Afrique que d'avoir tous ces pays partout où vivent des Africains. Certains où ils sont majoritaires, comme ici dans les Caraïbes. Aux États-Unis, nous avons une communauté noire qui est très importante. Des dizaines de millions de gens. Nous devons créer ce genre de connexion pour que les gens soient attirés vers l'Afrique, mais aussi surtout faciliter l'échange de personnes, c'est-à-dire que la mobilité des gens. C'est pour ça que la ZLECAf est une très grande idée. Quand il y aura liberté de commerce, liberté de mouvement en Afrique, surtout avec sa diaspora, je suis pour toute la diaspora africaine de partout dans le monde, qu'il n'y ait pas besoin de visa pour rentrer en Afrique, dans n'importe quel pays que ce soit. Ce serait déjà ça. Si un Américain, si un Caribéen peut venir au Congo, aller en RDC, aller en Afrique du Sud, aller au Cameroun, aller au Ghana, au Nigeria, aller en Égypte, sans visa, ils viendront tout seuls. Et si les Africains peuvent faire des efforts pour venir ici sans visa, je pense que tous ces hôtels seront remplis d'Africains. Les Africains, aujourd'hui, ne sont pas ce que nous voyons à la télé. Ils sont aussi riches que vous ne pouvez pas l'imaginer. Mais ce qui manque, c'est l'information, c'est la connectivité, c'est travailler ensemble pour bâtir des territoires nouveaux pour notre développement. C'est vraiment ça qu'il faut faire. Et notre génération d'aujourd'hui, avec tous les moyens de communication que nous avons, nous sommes capables de le faire.
Minister, thank you so much. Yeah. And thank you so much for mentioning the importance of management of resources, sir. It's greatly appreciated. And I like the words that the President of the African Development Bank often says in terms of measuring wealth of countries in just GDP form. Yes, GDP looks fantastic and so does growth rates, but of course people don't eat percentages. And when you look at the standard of living of a lot of Africans, even those that you've mentioned, Nigeria, Egypt, on the ground, it's not commensurate to the wealth that we see at the headline level. Minister Sarah, time is up, ma'am, but I thought that maybe you can help us finish this off. And I just want to put to you a point that you made around exercising and using the tools that we already have in our toolkit. I think, as any mechanic will agree, even the tools that you have can be sharpened. And so, ma'am, it's a question around sharpening what we do have in creating the enabling environment or better environment to attract capital from Florizel to attract, a better or favorable review from Ms. Arunma and the like. How are you thinking of sharpening that tool, ma'am, to better sharpen the efficacy of global Africa and its ability to transform economic development?
Thank you very much. You're right that we have the tools. How do we utilize the tools? We need to sharpen the tools. When you look at the whole of Africa, you realize that there's a lot we have to do in terms of governance restructuring. That's one of the most important things that we need to look at. Our governance reforms, we need to look at them both politically and economically. Politically, I heard my colleague on the other side mention the issue with integration visas. Yesterday, one speaker said, to go around Africa, you need more than 35 visas to go around. This does not improve our integration and our transformation purposes. And
that was Alika Dangote, so if you can imagine,
yeah, it was
Africa's
Dangote.
richest man
Yes.
needs 35
saying
visas,
that,
how much the rest
you
of
need
us?
35 visas to go around Africa. And I don't think that is the best to promote integration and sharpen the tool. So we need to look at that. We also need to look at economic reforms. My colleague on the other side mentioned that we have about 103.5 trillion of investment coming from the diaspora. And by 2015, how are we going to tap into this? Nobody will want to come and invest in places where there are no structures, one that improves on accessibility, structures that improves on transparency, structures that improves on accountability. So these are the tools that we also need to sharpen. And so that when they are confident that there's transparency, there's accountability and accessibility, straight away, I think that will also open more doors for investment and the transformation that we need. Okay. We also know the issue with infrastructure and technology development in Africa. We have a gap of about 130 to 170 million in investment in infrastructure. Our ports, our roads, energy sector. But I'm happy that with this, Afreximbank is doing a lot, and they are helping fund industrial parks where companies can just plug in and pay, especially with energy and certain types of infrastructure. And this is very, very important. We need to sharpen that to make sure we attract global Africa, attract funding into to Africa. And then another thing that I think we should look at. Sure. When you look at our budget, we are not able to accommodate the huge expenditures. So definitely we need to bring in the private sector. And in bringing in the private sector, there are certain incentives that we should give to the private sector to sharpen them, to enable them also support governments and support our economies to transform. In Ghana, an example is where we have one district, one factory. What the government is doing is that it's incentivizing businesses that want to set up in districts that have no factories, using the raw materials. We come in with some form of tax waivers in terms of your tools and your working capital. And so these are what we are doing to sharpen that space, because for us, 92% of the businesses in Ghana are in the SME space. And that SME space also contributes about 70% of our GDP. And so if you want to sharpen that and improve upon economic transformation, then we should look at the SME space as well and see how best we can support.
And those and many more, ma'am. And I know that you can tell us a whole lot more in terms of the contributions. I just am mindful of time, but I don't take for granted the honesty that yourself and your representative from Congo, ma'am, have displayed in mentioning the importance of management, sound management of resources and good governance in helping to contribute to this environment that allows capital to flow and feel free and at home in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank my esteemed panelists for their contribution.